All right, cool. All right, so yeah, if you look at that graphic, you guys will see there's different types of wood. First characteristic you see is the color, like you said, okay? The color is pretty important. It really kind of depends on what you're going to be using that wood for, right? Okay, so as an example, here is a piece of what we would consider most lumber, okay? This is what we call a Douglas fir, okay? All wood comes from trees, right? Okay, so this comes from a fir tree. You can tell that it is a pretty dense wood, okay? It's not super heavy, but it's got some weight to it, and it's got some strength to it, okay? When we build a house, we want to build it strong, right? So we use a harder wood to try to make sure that we can build something that's going to stand, right? It's going to stand up to the conditions that it's in, okay? When we frame a house, okay, do you see the walls when the house goes up? Do you see the lumber? No. Okay, we cover it, right? We cover the exterior with some kind of exterior covering. It might be siding or stucco or something like that. Probably we use a lot of stucco here, right? Okay, but when we build with lumber, a lot of times for a house or a building, okay, we're going to cover it. So this is not a wood that we would want to use outside. Okay, it doesn't have properties that help it resist the weather. If you put wood like this outside in the weather, as it dries up, wood tends to twist. Okay, so we don't want it to dry in a weird, strange formation, right? We want it to stay pretty much the same shape, right? So this is a good wood to use for framing. It's very, very typical. Okay, how about this wood? Do you guys know what this is? Feel it. I want you to pass it around and feel it. Okay. It's a very, very, very soft wood. It's very light. Would you agree that it's really light? Yeah. I would say so. What do you think, Brett?
It's like
Soft, right? It's almost soft like fabric, okay? So that's what we call balsa wood, okay? Balsa wood is what people use for like hobbies, building small things, modeling, stuff like that, okay? It can be really thick as well, okay? This is a really thin piece. But balsa wood is extremely light, okay? In fact, it actually moves almost like a feather falling, right? Okay? If I did that with this board, what's it going to do? It's dense, right? It's heavy, it's dense, it's going to fall quickly. Okay? Balsa wood. Would you use balsa wood to build a house?
no.
No, absolutely not. It's too soft. Okay? Balsa wood's, in fact, you can probably cut this with a knife. I can actually probably fold this. Okay? But balsa wood is a very, very light wood. It's something that you wouldn't use for building. Okay? This particular one, this is called redwood. Okay, this is redwood lumber. We can use this for construction, building a patio or something like that. What's nice about redwood is it actually has natural resistance to the weather, almost kind of a natural waterproofing. Okay, it's not waterproof, but it resists the water pretty well. So when we use redwood outside, okay, we don't have to coat this with something. It holds up really well to the weather. Does that make sense? So where do you think you would see this used? Outside, what would you build outside? A fence, maybe? Okay. What else? Maybe a deck, right? A deck or a patio behind your house? Yeah. That's where you see a lot of this stuff used. Okay, so that's a redwood. You guys ever seen redwood trees? California is kind of famous for their big redwood trees. They're huge, right? Yeah, there's one that you can actually drive through in California. Yeah, really neat. Okay, in the redwood forest. But yeah, okay, redwood is a pretty decent wood. Okay, this particular wood here, okay, this is a really light wood. All right, it's also pretty soft. Okay, if you guys run your hand across this, you can feel how soft it is. This is called poplar. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about poplar. I'll pass it so you can take a look at that. Okay. Poplar is a good wood that we use in shop because it's actually pretty soft. It's soft on the tools. In other words, it doesn't dull the blades real bad. Okay, when we use bits and blades and things like that, it's really easy for us to use that in shop class without damaging and having to replace blades all the time. So poplar is really popular with woodworkers. Okay, you can build furniture out of something like this. Okay, once I start drilling holes or cutting into something like this, you guys have been cutting the last couple days, right? You'll find that this wood weakens a lot when you remove some of the density from it. So if you were to drop that piece you've been working on, it might split and break, okay? So it is a pretty soft wood, all right? It's not gonna hold up. You're not gonna probably see flooring made out of poplar. Flooring's not gonna hold up well with people putting a lot of traffic pressure, repeated traffic on this, right? Okay, put a piece of furniture over that, something like this, it's gonna dent it, all right? So if you hit this with a hammer, it's definitely gonna leave a mark in it, okay? This one right here, okay, this is cedar, okay? You'll see cedar used a lot in like furniture, things like that, okay? This was really popular in like the 50s and 60s. Cedar has a really distinct smell to it. So I'm gonna pass this around, you guys can smell it, okay? But cedar, when you cut it, you can smell it for sure. People used this in the 50s and 60s. To make furniture, like the interior, like of a drawer, okay? Or you may have seen it in closets. They may have lined their closets with cedar, okay? It's got a really interesting smell to it, doesn't it? Okay, I like that smell. When you cut this fresh, you can definitely smell that cedar wood smell, okay? You guys use essential oils? No, if you ever use, they use cedar wood oil. Cedar wood is actually an essential oil that people use. It's supposed to be pretty good for you. But all these different woods have different qualities about them, right? Okay, so the hardness is one of the main things that we look at. Okay, if you're building something, you want to make sure you're using the right material. Okay, it's got to be able to hold up, right? Okay, you're not going to build furniture out of balsa. It's too soft. You could build furniture out of poplar, right? But you probably don't want to make flooring out of poplar, okay? You might not want to use poplar for framing. That's where you would use a harder wood, okay? Something like fir, okay? So all wood comes from trees, and there are a few qualities about each of those trees that make up how these woods are kind of formed, okay? What were you going to ask me, Brett?
Could you use poplar for trim?
You could use poplar for trim, yeah. That's fairly common, yeah. You might see it used for trim because it doesn't have to bear any weight, right? Okay, trim is just purely decorative, right? Okay, cool. So when it comes to this list of woods up here, these are a little more exotic, okay? Let's start with the first one, ash. Ash is a light colored wood. It's actually pretty light in weight too, okay? It's a little harder on your tools. It's kind of an exotic wood because it's kind of hard to find ash. Okay, beech wood is fairly soft. Okay, so is birch wood. They're lighter in color, and then we get to cherry, and you would think cherry would be really red. Okay, but it's not. It kind of has an orangish hue to it. All right, cherry wood comes from cherry trees, right? Okay, and it's a very, very common, more or less in the Northeast in the United States, okay? East Indian rosewood, where do you think that comes from?
India.
East India. Okay, rosewood is a very beautiful wood, has that reddish color to it. Mahogany, you'll see mahogany used. Mahogany can have almost a brownish hue or a reddish hue to it. Mahogany is used a lot in furniture making. Okay, it's a pretty expensive wood though. It's hard to come by. Okay, maple, if you look at the shop tables, does that kind of look like the color represented up there? Okay, that's exactly what our shop tables are made of. Okay, maple is a pretty decent wood. It'll hold up. It does, if you hit it with a hammer, it's going to dent, it's going to ding up. But we see maple quite often with furniture. Okay, it's easy to finish. It's light colored. It's affordable. It's a pretty good wood to use for like furniture. Red oak, okay? Oak and red oak are typical. You see, anybody have hardwood floors in their house? Yeah? So a lot of people have oak floors in their homes. holds up really well. It's a very hard wood, okay? So it can handle the traffic and things that people, the impact of moving furniture and stuff like that, right? Okay. Teak wood. Teak wood is a nice wood to use. Comes in a few different varieties of colors. And it is kind of it has kind of a brownish hue to it. But teak wood is used more for maybe finer woodworking, like jewelry boxes, things like that. Okay, you might see some teak wood flooring. Walnut. Walnut is a very hard wood. It is brownish in color, and a lot of furniture you'll see made of walnut. It's hard to get your hands on walnut, though. Okay. Eastern white pine. Okay, that's pretty much what we say when we talk about like fir. Okay, Eastern white pine. Most pines that you find are going to be usable for like building. Okay, it's a harder wood; it'll hold up. Okay, size of the trees and things like that allow us to make different cuts of pine that will allow us to cut 4x4s and 2x4s and 2x6s and things like that, right? Okay. All right. Fir trees. So fir tree is what most people would refer to as like a pine. Okay. Very similar to like an eastern pine. All right. Next up, you've got lodgepole pine, larch. Don't see much of that. Piranha pine. I've actually never heard of that. Pitch pine, red cedar. Okay, we have a piece of red cedar here. That's the same thing. It smells really nice, right? Okay, you can definitely tell when you're cutting red cedar. Scotch pine, western hemlock. Don't see a lot of those. White spruce, you may see some of that. And yew is, I believe, an Asian wood that we don't really get here in the United States. You'd have to like special order that. But all these different woods are used more or less for their color and their hardness. All right. So when you're building something, you really want to be mindful of that. Okay. What we use in the shop more than anything. Okay. So if we're doing framing and stuff like that, we're going to use Douglas fir. Okay. If we're doing something for building outside, we may use some redwood. Okay. We have lots of cedar in here. We build a lot of things out of pickets. So you might see pine or cedar pickets in here. And then we don't use a lot of balsa wood, but most frequently, you guys will get used to using the poplar wood, okay? So that's pretty much what we have in the shop. But I wanted to share that with you guys. A few qualities of wood, okay? When you cut down a tree, do you know how to tell how old that tree is? The rings, right? Okay, so when you look at a piece of wood that's been cut down, tree that's cut down, you can tell which direction that tree was growing, okay? You can tell that it was growing vertically because of what we call the grain of the wood, okay? So the grain allows us to see these would actually be rings if we were putting this flatter, right? And you could see that wood, you could see, kind of get an idea for how big this tree actually was based on the lines in the wood, right? That's the grain of the wood, okay? So we look at the grain. You always want to be mindful of the grain, okay? Second thing you want to be mindful of is, does it have any knots in it? Okay? These are the little round holes or the little round spots, maybe darker spots on the wood. Why is it important to watch for knots? Do you know, Camille? Yeah, you can't cut through these, okay? These will dull your blades. They will actually sometimes rip. Your saw blades and stuff will rip a knot out, and it'll go shooting the knot across the room. Okay, so you want to be mindful of knots. Also, knots tend to fall out of the wood. Okay, so as they get weakened and loosened up, they'll fall out, and then you have a big hole in your project, right? So we don't want that. So you need to watch out for knots. Okay, we try to avoid those the best that we can. It's really important to not run a knot through one of the blades in here, because it becomes a little bit dangerous, right? It becomes like a projectile. We don't want that, okay? So we'll talk more about knots in the wood, okay? It's good to understand how the grain of the wood runs. If I was building two sides of a box, okay, I want the grain to look the same on this side as it does on this side, right? Okay, so I want to make sure my grain is running the same direction. I wouldn't want a piece running this direction because the grain runs this way on this one and it runs vertical on this one. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's good to be mindful of those types of things when you're building, okay? So, you guys have any questions for me? Wood types? No? All right, cool. I'll let you guys get to it. You guys can keep cutting on your machines. And if you girls need to do some painting, we can do that, okay? Good job, guys.